Hey kids, Flexing Teacher Weber here with part 2 of percent to fraction and decimal. In this section, we'll focus on taking a percent and making a decimal. To write a percent as a decimal, make a fraction of 100 or mentally shift the decimal 2 spots to the right. Let me show you what I mean. Let's say we have the percent 58%. Well, we know from our previous video that 58% means 58 out of 100. And we know from previous work that when you have a fraction out of a base 10, out of 10, 100, 1,000, 2 zeros and 100 mean 2 decimal spots where we will put the 5 and the 8 and a 0 in front. So that's 58 hundredths. So you can make it a fraction out of 100, or you can use a little mental math. I'm going to focus here. If we look at this percent, this is like a tens digit. This is a ones digit. And we know after every ones digit, even though if we don't see it, there's always a decimal. And to make that percent into decimal form, we could shift that decimal 2 spots to the left. It ends up in front of the 5. And now we have the decimal 0 and 58 hundredths, which is exactly what we got the other way. So whatever way works for you, works for me. Let's look at some examples. 85% as a decimal. Well, I know that means 85 out of 100. And I know 2 zeros and 100 mean 2 decimal spots where we put an 8 and a 5 and then a 0 in front. Or 85%. Even though we don't see it, there's a decimal there. And I will shift it 2 spots to the left. And I would get 0 and 85 hundredths. Okay, number 2, 8%. Well, I know that means 8 out of 100. And I know that means 2 decimal spots. And I know that means in those decimal spots, I need to have 8 in the hundredths and a 0 in the tenths and a 0 placeholder. Or, if I just think mental math, 8%. Even though I don't see it, there's a decimal after that 8. And I can mentally shift it 2 spots to the left. In this case, I'll have to put a 0 in that open spot, and I would have 8 hundredths and a 0 placeholder in the 1 spot, the same as I got by making it a fraction. Knowing this mental math way is good because it might quickly help us do one like this. 34.5% or 34 5/10%. Well, here's the decimal after the 1 spot, and I will mentally move it 2 spots to the left. And there's my decimal, 345 thousandths. And then number 4, 110%. Even though I don't see it, there's a decimal after the 0, and I will mentally shift it 2 spots to the left. It ends up between the 2 ones, and I'm left with 1 and 10 hundredths, or I don't need that 0 on the end. I can just write 1 and 1/10. So that's how you write a percent as a decimal. Now let's combine everything together. We should be able to start with any different conversion now and move forward to the other 2 forms. So if I start with the fraction 4 over 25, I'm hopefully going to recognize that that's a base out of 100 or 10 or 1,000. I'll make it out of 100 by timesing by 4 and times by 4. And that's 16 over 100. 2 zeros and 100 tell us 2 decimal spots where we will put 1/6. The definition of percent is out of 100. So 16 out of 100, 16%. If I start with the decimal, I could go either way. I know I can take a decimal and mentally multiply by 100. The 2 zeros and 100 move the decimal 2 spots to the right. And that gets me 5%. 5%, I know, means 5 out of 100. And to get that in lowest terms, I can divide by 5 and divide by 5, and I get 1 over 20. So I should be able to go back and forth from each form, starting with a percent. Well, I know 35% means 35 out of 100. And I know 2 zeros on 100 mean 2 decimal spots where I will put a 3 and a 5 and a 0 placeholder. And then I'll put it in lowest terms by recognizing I can divide the numerator and denominator by 5. And I'll get 7 over 20. Ooh, and then I even threw a grade 8 kind of question in here, but you can do it. 1 and 11 over 50. Well, I'll start by seeing what I can do with it. I know I can make it out of 100. 22 out of 100. And I know 22 out of 100 has 2 decimal spots because there are 2 zeros in 100. And I'll put the 2 and the 2 there. But this time I'll have to take my whole number 1 and put it there. I have a whole number answer. And I know when you have a decimal, to make it a percent, you mentally multiply by 100, which shifts the decimal 1, 2. Right there. And now I have 122%. And then my last one, starting with a percent, 62%. Well, I might recognize right away. Maybe I'll do it like this. I'll do the decimal first, 62%. I know there's a decimal after the 2, and I can shift it 2 spots to the left. And the decimal will end up in front of the 6. Or I can recognize that 62% means 62 out of 100. And 2 zeros on 100 mean 2 decimal spots where I'll put the 6 and the 2 and a 0 in front. And then 62 out of 100, they're both even numbers, so I can divide by 2. And I get 31 over 50. So there you go. There's all the different conversions we have done. We have an assignment today where we're going to practice a bunch of them, and we'll practice over the next couple days and have a test very soon. Hopefully this is all making sense. Hopefully you're doing well. Flexing Teacher Weber, out.